Hi, I'm Donna McNeil. I'm the Episcopal Missioner to Michigan State University and the Associate Rector at All Saints Episcopal Church. I'm glad that you're joining us to watch this conversation about anti-racism. Joining me today is Valerie Smith. She is a parishioner at All Saints up the road from MSU. She is an experienced educator and trainer specifically on anti-racism, as well as many other things. Thanks for joining this conversation, Valerie.
It's a pleasure to be here.
What else would you like to tell us about who you are and why you do this work?
Who am I? I grew up under Jim Crow segregation, and I mentioned that right off the bat because not too many people that I have met um, have had that experience of actually living under the rule,
Mhm.
under the law of segregation.
And
Uh,
where did you grow up?
I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, and Missouri entered the Union with the Missouri
Right.
Compromise. And so uh, by the time I was a child, we were still segregated, and those laws changed. The laws of the land changed uh, legally during my high school years.
Wow. So what did
So
that
the whole
segregation
community. Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
My entire community was just people of color,
Mhm.
African Americans predominantly, and other ethnicities actually. And the schools we went to were all black, and the grocery stores we shopped at were all black, and there were certain places in the downtown shops that we couldn't go into. For example, we couldn't eat
Mm.
in the restaurants. We could go into Macy's, but we could shop at Macy's after a certain point of time.
Oh,
I wasn't very many people that did at the time,
sure.
but we could eat at the lunch counter in the basement.
Which
And
I'm assuming is not where the white folks ate.
no, no.
Yeah.
We had a, I loved my neighborhood. My friends that I grew up with in school are still my best
Yeah.
friends today. Literally, we talk all the time together. We even have a Facebook page where we recognize our achievements and
Mm.
our sad and the things that are sad about our lives. Of many of us are losing our parents
Yeah.
and our partners and spouses, etc. Um, but that's a little bit about it. Desegregation began slowly in my community, but the schools weren't really fully desegregated until after I had graduated and left for college.
Mhm.
And then the busing and taking a lot of the uh, excellent Black teachers and putting them into the other schools and bringing white teachers into our community who were afraid,
Mm.
young, and we're going like, oh my gosh, needed a lot of coaching, and
Mhm.
that was in the late '60s, early '70s.
Mhm.
My dad was a musician, and he was a union labor leader at a Black union. So the unions were segregated.
Mhm.
Everything was segregated.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a little bit, just a
Yeah.
snapshot of Jim Crow segregation, and I just want to folks to know that that was my home, and that was when I was most comfortable and
Yeah.
felt safest.
Yeah.
Was when I was in communities surrounded by people I loved and who cared for me,
Mhm.
and we watched each other's back.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting and worth noting that Jim Crow existed as far north as Kansas City.
Oh yeah,
You know,
all of
we
us.
often think of it as a deep South reality, but it wasn't just the deep South.
Well, no, it wasn't. That's the other point I want to make. And remember 8 Mile in Detroit. I mean,
Right, 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 right. Yeah, yeah,
I'm just saying safety. I mentioned that because safety has been an issue for people of color, and
mhm,
it still is.
yeah.
So I
You also grew up as an Episcopalian in Kansas
I
City?
did. We had Black Episcopal churches
Yep,
and white Episcopal
yeah,
churches, and I grew up in the Black Episcopal church. There were other churches that my friends visited. That I visited of my friends. The AME Church was African Methodist Episcopal. Baptist Church was very big in our community. The Methodist Church was very big in our community. Again, segregated churches at the
Mhm.
time. We had a Catholic church in our community where actually, I didn't go to the Catholic church. I visited. I had the honor. My family had the great honor of hosting a German foreign exchange students.
Oh,
Senior
wow.
in high school. We were still good friends. Matter of
Oh, that's
fact,
cool.
we FaceTime probably once a month.
Oh,
Uh,
that's great.
but and
That had to
yes,
have been fascinating for both of you
oh, and my
as high school.
entire school, our whole
I'm
high school.
sure.
It's
Yeah.
just like, whoa. She was a cheerleader. Can you imagine? All black
Wow,
cheerleader team, and there's
that's
Rita.
great. German
She
exchange
was
student.
quite gregarious and just blended in very well. But at any rate, she was Roman Catholic, and so uh, there was a Catholic church in our community. And I have to tell you, I'm not sure. I'm guessing it might have been integrated.
Interesting.
Right.
Huh. Oh, I'm gonna have to do some research about that.
Yeah,
That's
me
pretty cool.
too.
Yeah.
Because the fact is, we pointed her the way, but we didn't go.
You didn't go. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's which is a whole other story.
All
That's
right.
for another day. When we lengthen the target non-target sheet, we'll have that conversation.
Yes, right, exactly. Right.
Um, so let's jump forward very quickly.
Sure.
And in general, let's talk about what anti-racism is. So can you define anti-racism for us?
Um, yes, I will define it in what it isn't.
Okay.
It isn't uh, people of color or even uh, white people, feeling bad and saying, oh my gosh, this is too bad. What can I do? Or I really understand her. That's great. Tell me more is wonderful if they actually say tell
Yeah.
me more. But isn't it horrible? And uh, yeah, yes. Um, so I think of anti-racist as actually an action verb. It means you are actually doing something.
Yeah.
You are actually using the power of your voice,
Mm.
which a lot of people don't feel like. A lot of people have a lot of thoughts, feelings, experiences, but safety is a huge issue for many people.
Mhm.
And although I'd like to think that's going to change with the new administration in Washington, um, but feeling bad is not going to help anybody. You're going to have to say something, do something, and that starts with what's going on up here. So you need
Oh,
to start.
so my job isn't to fix other people, it's to work on myself?
Well, that's a good place to start. Actually, that's a lifetime job.
Yeah.
It's not a quick fix.
So there's not like one
Scary.
class we can take and master it.
So let me give you an example of what a very brave anti-racist might do. And this is an example that I use almost all the time in the health equity. I will explain to you a little later the kind of workshops or
Okay.
groups that I work with. But we talk about the social determinants of health and why
Uh-huh.
people die at a disparate rate based on their identity
Yeah, and
and
this year has
the conflict
been
that they have.
such a
And
glaring example of that. COVID has
yes,
made
right.
that.
Right. Access is big, but at any rate, one of the examples that if you're in any of the work that I do, we're gonna get to this point at some point. Thanksgiving dinner when the family's together, and grumpy grandpa. Okay, I
Mhm.
shouldn't say grumpy grandpa. Grandpa might be just fine, but grumpy somebody's at the table.
Somebody, yeah.
Somebody
Aunt
else
so
is
and
at the
so or cousin so and so. Yeah,
cousin so
somebody.
and so, and I always use uncle. Uncle
Yeah,
so and so is talking about those people. And why can't those people get a job? Why can't those people do this? Why can't those people do that? And you just finished your anti-racism 101 class and you're sitting there going like,
here he goes again. I just
that's
got to
not
see
being
this
an
today. Right.
anti-racist.
Yeah, yeah.
Because guess what? Little Bobby and little Mary Sue, who are 4 and 5 years old, are learning from the loudest voice that they hear. They're learning from the people that uh, do things like tickle them when they come over and play with them, and that's who they just love. I mean, they love their parents, of course,
Sure.
but you can't wait till.
Yeah, no, we all know who those people are. We
Yeah,
all
right.
know at that family gathering who the uncle or the cousin or, the brother-in-law or whatever that we can't wait to see. We all know who those people are.
That and
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
and they spew their view of whatever, and that's what little whoever is internalizing
Yeah.
because they love this person. That's the person. Their parents, their sister, their brother. They don't have time to be playing around with them,
Right.
but
Yeah.
uncle whoever, cousin so and so does.
Yeah.
And so they form this bond, and they start to think. I mean, that's when it starts to internalize. Now they can't put two and two together or whatever at
Sure.
that point, but it's inside of them. So, excuse me. This is going to happen next
Mhm.
Christmas, Thanksgiving, the family birthday party, the family reunion, or
Right.
whatever, that's going to
Summer
happen.
barbecue, wherever you are. Right.
The
Yeah.
barbecue. Oh, mercy. The church barbecue. Yes. The church cookout. I mean, all these places is when our children learn
Yeah.
what's in our hearts and what we're saying, right? They know. We don't have to sit down and say, now you be careful about whatever, although sometimes we do that
Yeah.
too. Um, So an anti-racist is somebody who, among other things, realizes this. So first, so you gotta get to the point where you have that aha moment and say, "Wow, this is an aha moment," and what can I do to
Mhm.
change the course of events for the life of the children in my family? I might not be able to change what happens around me, but I can start to influence my children.
Yeah, you're probably not gonna change Uncle so and so who's got
No,
30 years on you and, a whole backstory that has gotten him to that place. But you're right. Everyone else
well,
in that room.
you're right. And you may or may not be able to change his heart, but you can certainly have a conversation with him before the next time he comes over. And
Yeah,
that has to be well planned because you love uncle and
right.
aunt and cousin and their best friend who they always bring over, who always comes with who is funny as heck and everyone loves to hear him. He might be the problem or she
Yeah,
might be the problem,
right,
right?
right.
So whatever the situation is, you know what it is. You've done some anti-racist stuff, you've done some internalized thinking, and you said, okay, I'm ready.
Yeah,
So, what can I do for those people? And I'm saying those people are your own family members,
yeah.
the people you love, the children you can influence, and you have to plan it. You do not want to split the family up. It is not a quick fix. So, depending on the relationship that you have with that person or those people or whatever in your family, those that you love, your friends that come over, or the friends they bring, or whatever, you have to plan it. And
Mhm.
it might take you 2 or 3 years to figure out how to
How to
do
do
this,
that. Yeah,
but you're working on it. You're thinking about it. I'd say we don't have 2 or 3 years to wait.
yeah,
You
yeah.
might notice that
So it's not as simple as like saying, you can't say that at my table."
no, it's not that simple. Not if you want to keep. It could be that simple. It just depends.
It depends on
It's
situation,
very
right?
individual. And so part of being an anti-racist is to understand your environment, the
Mhm.
people you are around, the people you love, and where you want to enter the work. I suggest you start it with your family, but some people decide to start using their voice for the first time at work because
Yeah.
you see that a cup with water coming up and it boils over. I'm suggesting you don't wait to that point
Yeah.
till you start using your voice. You don't want to lose your job. You don't
Right.
want to kick your best family member out of your family. The question is, how can I do this work? And it's not a one shot deal. So you might talk to whoever, and let's just go back to cousin whoever
Whoever,
who
yeah.
brings loudmouth whoever over each year
Let's
and
say
say,
cousin Joe. I do not have a cousin Joe. Do you have a
okay,
cousin
let's
Joe?
use cousin
I
Joe.
wanna be, I don't wanna get
Use
anyone in trouble.
cousin Joe. I don't want to use any of my cousins'
I have
names
a cousin
either,
Joe.
right?
Right.
And so you ask cousin Joe, you invite him out to, however, invite him over to
Right.
dinner, talk over the phone, just say, cousin Joe, I've been learning a lot about myself. Let me tell you what I'm learning about me. I've learned this, this, and this, and whatever you're learning, or you
Mhm.
might practice it, you might write it out, whatever, because you love this person,
Mhm.
And this is what I've discovered. I whatever the point is, you practice it, you write it out, you think about it, and then you might say at some point, we've decided to start talking to kids about this
Mhm.
intentionally. We've been reading a lot of books together, whatever you've been doing.
Right.
Bring all that part in it. And it occurs to me, when you continually talk about XYZ, be specific.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
This
yeah.
this is really completely opposite of what we're trying to teach the kids.
Mhm.
So and again, this isn't uh I learned this, and so therefore you can't come
Right.
over anymore. This is
Right.
not where we're going with this. If you want to keep the relationship going, but ultimately you have had to think about what you want to accomplish in that conversation, and it might just be the first of maybe three,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
you might not want to say, listen, you cannot use that language. If you do, we will invite you to leave the table at that moment. I mean, you don't want to start off that way.
Right.
You're still saying what you're learning or whatever, and just say, and you might say, so what what can you do? You understand that this is where we're coming from. How might you, what do you hear me saying?
Yeah,
Any
how does that strike you? How are you feeling? What is that?
Exactly,
Yeah. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
So basically, the bottom line is, being an anti-racist is an action verb. It's not a inaction verb. It's
Yeah.
not a state of being verb back into the old
Right.
school days of talking about
Right.
verbs. It's an action verb. You actually have to think about it and do something.
So
Okay,
how is that different from saying, "Well, I'm not racist"?
who who yourself as the
Yeah,
speaker?
like if I were gonna say instead of maybe for whatever reason, I don't anti-racism, I don't know, it seems too complicated to me. I wanna just say, "I'm not racist," and
Well,
own that.
the question is, what does that mean? If it means that I'm not racist because I say that all the time, or I'm not racist because this is what I do, this is what I teach my children, this is what I think, this is the letter I wrote to somebody. I mean, it doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily have to
right.
be a verbal confrontation.
Yeah.
This is what I am doing, and this is the way I'm living my life. Um, because saying I'm not anti-racist is just like saying
Or saying, "I'm not racist." Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry. Saying I'm not racist is just like saying I don't know what it's like, but it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
just
I think you're right.
it's just like well, let's just use our faith tradition. Well, I'm a Christian. Okay,
Sure.
that's nice.
Right.
What does that
Good
mean?
for you.
You're
Yeah,
right. So you
right,
went with Christian, but
right.
you can get the Christian scarf, right?
Right, right.
So, but what does that
What are
mean?
the implications of that? How does that
Yeah,
if
right. So the
yeah,
same thing with I'm an anti-racist. I was at the Capitol marching. Well, that's helpful, especially if people need to see crowds to make their point.
Right.
Um, However, if you leave the Capitol steps and you go back and you whatever, then
Yeah.
you showed up for somebody else, but did you do the work? I mean, are you listening to people? Sometimes being an anti-racist is about shutting up and listening.
I think that's the most
Somebody
powerful
else's story.
thing that I have learned doing this work is when I it's a I can almost recognize it by the way it resonates in myself, sort of, that feeling you get, that energy you get when okay, something's working here. It that is almost most true for me when I shut my mouth and listen, and literally and figuratively. So sometimes that means reading voices on Twitter that are very different from mine. Um, Black men and women, Latino men and women. I've been following recently United Farm Workers, and not so I can argue with them. That's another Twitter behavior I'm bad about. Um, but to those voices and to other voices in my life, without arguing. This is a thing that we talk. So you and I have both done training with Visions Inc. You have done many other things as well, but part of what Visions Inc. one of the exercises that Visions Inc. gives us is called Try On, where you practice entertaining an idea that you may not agree with. That my first impulse may be to reject, but I'm going to turn off that and just sit with it and listen and turn off my inner critique, particularly when listening to voices of difference. And that moment of listening is often where I feel like is often the place that feels most important to me.
Um, yes. The
Go for
challenge
it.
with
Disagree with me, Valerie. Go for it.
no. The challenge with visions, which is the core of the work that I do, no matter even if it's an hour with somebody, I'm going to incorporate some
Yeah.
pieces of visions in the work. Valerie Batts,
Yeah.
Visions Incorporated.
I'll put a link up.
Yes. Um, However, those guidelines are all rather interwoven. And we start with the first one, which is listen. Hello, listen
Mhm.
with an open heart and an open mind. So we spend a lot of time talking about what that looks like, feels like, sounds like, is.
Mhm.
So listening is key. But there are other there again, we spent a lot of time talking about that. Now, and there she had 10 guidelines. There's a I use iterations of that. I've tweaked some of them, but I use five of her core ones. Uh, Understand both and realities.
Mhm.
So something can be both this way and something else and another way. And we talk about that. We do exercises to demonstrate that. But you mentioned something just now that is different, and that's conversations on Twitter and conversations on TikTok, I
Social
guess,
media in general. Yeah.
social media in general. And I have to say that those conversations, like any conversations, can work both ways. And it's
Definitely.
interesting that a lot of times they're with people you don't know,
Mhm.
and you don't know what they're going to do with that conversation. So I'm still old school. I like to talk directly to people,
Yeah.
and so that we have a common understanding of what each of us is saying. So we practice words like "tell me more" or "help me
Mhm.
understand what you meant by that," or "fill me in a little bit more on that," so that
Mhm.
it's it's learning to ask the questions that force you to listen,
Mhm.
force you to. So being an anti-racist is sometimes asking somebody to explain something to you.
Mhm.
That's an action. It's not
Yeah.
just you thinking about wonder what they
Right.
thought and how dare they say this, or well, if I were them, I would. No,
Right.
That's
Yeah.
not an action. That's just,
Right.
well, I guess it's an internal action.
Yeah.
Um, but it's actually interacting with someone and saying, "Help me understand," or um, "When did that start for you?"
Mhm.
Or how,
Mhm.
those kind of questions. Now, with little Bobby and little Susie at the dinner table, one of the things they can observe you saying is, you can tell them, this is an action. This is being an anti-racist, in my opinion. Uh, Ibram makes Kendi, he might have a different way of explaining it, but
Sure.
I think I even agree with him and he would agree with me.
Yeah.
You might start with little Bobby and little Susie. I'm just using these names, and probably little Joaquin and little, whatever. But I mean, it could be anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, just say, I'm going to have a conversation with cousin Jimmy, and you know, we're going to talk about some of these things that you and I have been talking about,
Mhm.
and we've been talking about in our family, and and depending on the age of the child, but they need to be they
Yeah.
need to understand what's going on too, and how you respond to them in terms of what they're telling you is happening at school or in their families or whatever. Again, our first guideline is listen
Yeah.
with an open heart and an open mind. So an anti-racist does a lot of listening and then interacting and then responding. I mean, I think it's important to listen, and I think it's important to think about it, and key is what happens next. That's what
Yeah.
gives you the 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 background
Mhm.
to either say
Right.
something or ask a question or write a letter or communicate with somebody or withhold support for that
Mhm.
organization,
Mhm.
however. But it's an action verb. It's not just a, "Oh, I feel your pain." No,
Right.
you don't feel my pain. That's
No, and vice
impossible for
versa.
you to feel my
Yeah,
pain.
it's my pain. Right.
Guess
Yeah.
what? You don't feel my fear. You don't feel my
Right.
background. You don't fear any of my life's experiences. You really don't feel
No.
that.
No. No. I want to say a little bit more about social media because it's so much a part of student life.
It
Um,
is.
and and one of the problems with social media, and I'm a real believer that it's about the user. That social media is utterly dependent upon who the users are. Um, and so we can create the social media world we want to live in to some degree. We've seen in recent weeks how that can jump beyond social media, but we can have a big influence on that. One of the problems with social media is it becomes an echo chamber. If you're only listening to your friends and people like you, whatever that means, and that could mean a very ethnically diverse group of people, but they're all your own age, or
Right, right, right.
an in a very diverse group in terms of age, but they're all from your race or your part of the country or your part of the world, even, and that creates an
Or
echo
your
chamber.
worldview. Right.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mhm.
And that creates an echo chamber where we only get our own ideas reinforced. One of the wonderful things about Twitter, Instagram, and some other social media sites is that you can easily expand that circle. So on Twitter, I can easily follow. Um, there's a rabbi on the East Coast that I follow regularly, and she often says things that I have to stop and think about. Um, and and she often changes what I thought I knew. That has
Mhm.
happened more times than I can count just in a couple of years of following her. Um, there are a number of African American, um, s- I was going to say commentators. Some of them are sort of well known people who've written books and have a big following, and then there's other people I've just happened upon partly from following those streams that I thought had an interesting voice that I needed to listen to, and so I follow some voices like that. Um, I try to pick up a pretty ethnically diverse group of people I follow because I'm white and I live in a very white world. Um, there are social media gives an opportunity to do that that is much harder to do, sitting here in East Lansing, Michigan.
Sure.
By definition has a kind of closed network of people. So there's certainly things worth watching out for in social media. There's also some real opportunities that it provides, that I find really amazing.
I would agree. And not having grown up with social media, that puts me at a disadvantage because it's just like talking about. That's why I mentioned Jim Crow segregation at
Yeah.
first, because not, that's something you read in 2 pages of a book and then move on to World War whatever.
Right. 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 Right.
so, um, so I can't speak in detail on social media simply because. I don't hang out there all the time. I'm only on one site, which none of the young folks are on, and that's Facebook. And I did have a Twitter account, but then I realized I'm on my device all the time, and I'm not out doing stuff. But I can tell you something I just discovered, and I just discovered it day before yesterday. And I'm sure
Cool.
everybody understands algorithms and all that kind of stuff. But I posted a picture with my AKA. This is in
Yes.
honor of Soror Vice President Kamala Harris. So she is actually one of my sorors and one of my sorority sisters. And I posted a picture in some paraphernalia. That's what we call this
Uh-huh.
paraphernalia, the accoutrements that I wear AK ring all the
Oh, that's
time. You never
cool.
knew that that was
I
on my little
didn't
finger, did you?
know.
Right? You never see me without it. I always have
Wow,
it
that's cool.
on. Anyway,
Well, I'll never
I
forget.
posted that picture, and suddenly I saw I was connected with all these people. I mean, I've got like 400 friends, but I only hear from the same 20
Right.
every day, right? All of a sudden, I'm flooded with AKAs from all over.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying social media also, at least in my limited experience, has also a way of shaping
Absolutely.
a narrative. And
Absolutely.
so that's something that I think is, I'm sure they're teaching it in schools these days, but that's something you have to be careful for.
Yeah. And
Careful.
why I think if you're going to be on social media, um, you have to find ways to widen that bubble,
Hmm.
and so that it doesn't so that social media doesn't shape everything you believe.
Well, right, and that's the
Yeah.
same with multi channels on television, for example, folks. And
Or the church you go to.
pardon me.
Or the church you go to.
Oh, absolutely. So yes. So speaking of the church you go
Right.
to,
Right.
um, I love to church visit, and I do.
Yeah.
I have been.
I do too, actually.
I have two very favorite churches, even here in our community here, that I don't go to very often because, of course, I'm busy at our church. But sometimes if it's a special occasion and my friends will invite me there. And in my world, before COVID, the beauty shop. I mean, there are
Yeah.
movies and plays and all this stuff about the beauty shop and the barber shop, and I'm sure that that may or may not be ethnically specific, but there are other gathering places,
Yep.
and the beauty shop was a place that it was like the United Nations. I mean, well, it wasn't ethnically diverse like the United Nations, but it was prospectively diverse like
Yeah.
the United Nations because the fact is all people of color don't
Every
think the same and haven't had the same experience, right?
but a whole lot of them have hair. So, it's a normal a natural meeting place.
Well, oh, at the beauty and barber shop. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's for
Yeah.
sure. That's
Yeah.
for sure. But you can go to a beauty shop. I can go to a beauty shop anywhere in the area and not have the
Yeah.
family unit that
Yeah.
my girl Delisa, I gotta give a shout out to my girl Delisa. I mean, it's just like home. And
Yeah.
and so it really feels like home,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, but we come from different points of view. So we have all kind of things we disagree about too. That's the other thing. Being anti-racist doesn't mean you agree with
Right.
everybody who maybe looks like you or the same age as you or the same whatever.
Same
Being
political views.
anti
Right.
anything is using who you are. In my case, my voice, uh, to uh, enhance the possibility of changing for the better.
Mhm.
But being an anti-racist means that and again, mm, I really respect Dr. Kendi. He certainly doesn't use the words that I'm using,
Yeah.
but I think it's important to be a thinker, but it can't just stay in your head. It's got to be in your action or how you interact with somebody else or how
Yeah.
you learn more so you can interact with somebody. I have a nephew who's getting a PhD at the University of Iowa, which again the the university that my dad went to. Who knew
Right.
it's just interesting about the generations,
Yeah. Yeah.
And my dad, who went there for a pharmacy degree, but could not be a pharmacist in Missouri. They were not hiring any black men
Yeah. Yeah.
pharmacists. So he took up his hobby, which was a musician. He was a professional musician, not a
Yeah.
pharmacist. But at any rate, my
Mm.
young nephew is getting his PhD there, and he discovered that my dad was an alpha man. Oh my gosh! I mean, this young man who really, Aunt Val was just like, there's Val, Aunt Val again, right? He's
Uh-huh.
like,
Like,
suddenly
yeah.
he's interested. We've been communicating. I mean, it's about connection,
Yes.
communicating, sharing ideas, and reaching out. Now, that doesn't mean. I mean, you can do that in writing. You don't have to do
Mhm.
it verbally. You can do it any kind of way. But it means it's an action verb and not just something to say. I'm an
Yeah.
anti-racist.
Yeah.
I just want to say, well, prove it. I know you don't
That's
have to
good.
prove
No,
it.
no, no, that's good. I like that. Okay.
Right.
Prove it. Show me. That's good.
Show me. That's
Yeah.
better, not
Yeah.
prove it,
Yeah.
because you're
Yeah.
not here to prove anything but to yourself.
Well,
Who
we
you
were talking about Missouri, so show me was
show me state. That's for sure. That
yep.
is for sure.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Well, speaking of connection, I'll just in passing is I was ordained in Kansas City, um, at the cathedral in Kansas City.
Did I know that?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it before, but
Oh
yeah,
my gosh.
yeah, yeah,
How
yeah,
about that small world, right?
exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing that's cool is until you have the conversations, you don't know what the connections are. Um,
Right. Well, that's
have
for sure. Right.
yeah,
Right.
have you watched, um, Henry Louis Gates' ancestry series, Finding Your Roots
I
on
watch it in. I tape it and I watch it in spurts. Right.
yeah,
Right.
that tends
Right.
to be what I do too. And part of why he's talked about why he does this series and the most amazing moments are when people discover how complicated and diverse their backgrounds are or when they discover connections to pieces of history they didn't know they had a connection to. On a recent episode, he found that Nora O'Donnell, the white CBS news anchor person, is genetically related to his father or grandfather. That
Hmm.
they're cousins, genetically, Nora O'Donnell and Skip Gates are cousins. I mean,
Yeah.
the connections are remarkable, but we have to listen to each other to know that.
Well, the other thing I think that we as a nation are just discovering is that there were people here long before the
Yeah.
enslaved people were brought here in chains and stuff, and what is happening to the indigenous populations. And so stating your land and where you whose land you are currently occupying, I realize now organizations are beginning to do that. um,
And as you say that, we will acknowledge that we are on Anishinaabe land where we are sitting now. Um,
which we need. Yes, thank you. And also there are indigenous communities I that are still approximately 600 years later fighting for their land and water rights
yes.
right here in good old America. So I
Yeah.
mean, we have a long way to go. We have a
So
long way to go.
I spent a lot of time thinking about and doing some work on um, specific policy initiatives because I get frustrated with kind of band-aid approaches.
Hmm.
Um, charity efforts don't do much for me. I
Mhm.
think it's important that people are fed and housed and clothed.
Mhm.
But I always find myself asking, why are people hungry? Let's change
Right.
the thing that makes people hungry.
Mhm.
And I firmly believe that people that we need to be doing both, that we have to have
Right.
people doing both.
Right.
And I just tend to get drawn toward the policy issues
Mhm.
because I get frustrated with it.
Sure. Right.
And I'm utterly grateful for the people who can, um, week after week, month after month after month, make sure that people are fed.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. It's a
yeah.
both and. You
It's a
need
it is
that.
a both and,
Yeah.
exactly. It's yeah,
Right.
it is absolutely a both and. But I tend to get drawn to the policy questions.
Mhm. Mhm.
So thinking about our history as a nation that is rooted in genocide and slavery, uh, enslaving of free people, um,
Yes.
acknowledging that history that continues to infect us.
Mhm.
My words. How do we begin to address that at the causes of that? The how do we address the roots of that?
I think depending on where you want to make a big change, I think feeding people is important. And so I don't want to tell folks who
Right.
might be listening to this
Indeed.
not to either donate money or work
I
and
agree.
do something to food bank. I think a lot has to do with what your expertise is.
Mhm.
And so there are plenty of commissions in town. I mean, I would Google or whatever what is happening in your local area and see. So, for example, Ingham County Health Department.
Mhm.
I can't tell you right now whether they have a citizens group that's studying XYZ. I don't know that. I don't know if our governor has a citizens group that's looking at XYZ. I mean, I don't know that.
Mhm.
You could write your
It's worth
legislator
asking. Right. Yeah.
or your commissioner or whatever. You can, if you have something on your heart that you want to dig deep into, then look into it. Do your homework. That's
Yeah.
part of what you need to do to be an anti-racist or anti-ist,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's not a,
Right.
part of my challenge with anti-racist is that the social determinants of health, which are deeply rooted in your identity, whether it's your race
Mhm.
or your age or your first language or whatever. All those pieces of your identity impact what society says that here you have the keys to our kingdom, right?
Yeah.
But race is okay. I mean, I can deal with that because hey,
Yeah.
I would say that that's America's original sin,
I
right?
agree. Yep.
But at any rate, um, so pick the issue you're interested in and learn more about it. Do your homework. That's part of the deal.
Mhm.
There are all kind of action groups. Um, uh, I I I don't want to necessarily AA university women have groups that delve into issues. I'm sure young folks have
Mhm.
groups that they would can look up or call someone. Call Sarah Anthony at the state at our Michigan Capitol and just ask her,
Or call
write her or whatever.
Representative Alyssa Slotkin's office.
You know
She's
what?
she's
Yes,
our congressional representative. She's outstanding. Her staff are excellent,
and
and
she will respond to you.
yeah, she
Well,
will.
so will Sarah Anthony, right?
Right,
But
right,
you're
right, right.
right. Alyssa Slotkin would be,
Yeah.
well, even with COVID. Here's the thing: even with COVID, and I do not go out of my house unless it's a critical
Yeah.
need. But you can find something even when you're inside a space. I wrote I wrote postcards. Somebody else took them someplace and delivered them for Alyssa Slotkin. There's always something you can
Yeah.
do. You just have to check into it.
Yeah.
Ask
One of
some.
the things I often, mention both online and in real life is, police oversight commissions. Most no, I won't say that. Many communities have some police oversight commission. If you're concerned about policing in your community, find out how that functions, go to meetings. If your community doesn't have a civilian police oversight commission, it needs one.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so if you're concerned about policing, contact leaders in your community and ask how you start a police oversight commission. Um,
you
because
are
public
anything.
officials in any area, whether it's police or fire or city council, they work for us as citizens in our community, and we need to be involved. Um,
One of the things that we do in our work, which on a best day
yeah,
is over a period of time, and our work is approximately 32 hours worth of being together, right,
mhm,
over a period of time. But one of the things that we do is we create scenarios, or we
yeah,
ask people to give us. I mean, you hear what people are interested in, and I don't think people understand how important transportation is for people who
right,
need services like from the health department,
yeah,
because that's where they can get assistance. So we give a scenario, and all these scenarios are based on truth. You know, it's a snowy day. The
right,
route got jammed up. A street light went out. You were at the bus stop with your children because at certain shelters you have to leave during the day
right.
and your children have to be gone
Go
during the
with
day,
you, right?
right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
y'all are out and you need to get to your doctor's appointment at the health department. These are all true scenarios that we
right.
come with. So the bus didn't show up because it
Because
broke
of the
down.
snow, right?
It was,
Yeah,
so
right,
you get on the bus, you get to the health department, you've missed your appointment.
right. Now what?
Now what?
Yeah,
Well, you were not on time. Well, my bus didn't show up, kind of
yeah,
thing. Well,
right.
tough. Somebody else.
I was at the bus stop waiting. The bus was not. Yeah.
Or even the forms that you have to fill out. Well, one of the things we did at our church, we during one of our Lenten seasons, because in the Episcopal Church we observe Lent,
Mhm.
and we did this for a whole 6 weeks. We did scenarios. It was just a really small group of about six of us that came. They came to do this, and we did scenarios. They had to go out and fill out a form to show that they needed assistance,
Mhm.
that you had to
Right.
go to the health department, get the form.
Yeah.
So at the time, I went there, got the form. The sucker was like 50 some odd pages, right?
Mhm.
However, they have people there that would assist you. Now, again, during COVID, I'm not sure,
Yeah.
probably online, and then you have to have
Right.
technology, right? But just to understand
What's
what
required.
folks
Right.
have to go through. So in our work, we actually, so they filled out the form,
Mhm.
and then one week we gave them an address, and we said, "You live at somewhere in this neighborhood, the intersection of, I won't name the streets.
Sure. But
They're in
actual
low
street. Yeah.
income.
Yeah.
They're in low income area in our community, and you need groceries to for the next week, and you need to, and this is how much money you have."
Mhm.
And so they had, and you have a family of however many. I mean, it got very
That's great.
complicated, and the folks that did it were like, "Oh my god," because the
Yeah.
things you learn about. So each of these questions has something to do with one of the social determinants of health. Well, guess what? And we gave them a kid that was around 1 year or so old. So walking distance with a child, a mile and a half is probably the limit that makes sense to do safely, right?
Yeah.
And so they were trying to
And
find
that
a
sounds
grocery.
far. I don't think I ever walked a mile and a half as a 1-year-old.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
you're gonna have to carry that child someplace. But at any rate, we gave them an intersection. You live in this part of town, and this is how much money you have to spend for groceries and food. Well, we learned a lot of things. What was at the stores that were within a mile and a half
Right.
radius of that
Lots
place,
of broccoli and salad things and fresh fruit and things like that, right?
and
None of that.
and what you could afford. I'm gonna
Right.
tell you, you can afford. Uh, I won't I'm sorry. I just said I won't name names. There are fast food places that you can get full on, and you can
Right.
feed your family for X amount of dollars, and it's high in sodium
Yep.
and etc. fats and da
Lots
da
of
da
empty
da da.
calories. Yeah.
So you see how one problem will layer on another problem, but you
Yeah.
can feed your families.
Right.
How many liquor stores were in this area? And what did you pass by? They didn't have to actually go into the stores. They had to, but the group in our
Had to
church that
see.
did this, they had to go there, see what was in a 1.5 mile radius and what the options were to feed their children. I mean, it was an aha moment. They
Yeah.
discovered a lot about food deserts, which we talk about, but we don't really
Right.
care about or know about.
Know
I
about
mean,
it.
those of
Yeah.
us who don't have to live there, right?
Right.
And have to and don't have loved ones that are having to survive there. And they learned about what you had to do to fill the process of filling that out.
Yeah.
Um, they learned about transportation. They learned about the health system. By the way, we have some amazing clinics. I mean, Lansing has some really great assets
Yeah.
that some communities don't. However,
Yeah,
so
transportation is a big challenge.
transportation,
And time. So if you've gotta fill out all that paperwork, and then you get all that done and you manage to get an appointment at the health department, um, your appointment probably isn't gonna be at the time it says you're gonna walk in for your 2 o'clock appointment and probably not get seen right away because they're busy and full. And that's true for all of us when I mean, we've all had that experience when we go to the doctor, but at health department, it's longer. I mean, I've
oh
sat
yeah,
with
sure.
friends and
Right.
had to go to the health department, and it wasn't an hour or 2, it was 4 or 5,
Well,
to
if
get
you get
seen.
there and then you turn around and can't get,
Right,
then you have to wait longer or go back home and try
right.
again.
So
Uh,
so you've given up at least 1 day's work for all of this.
oh well, there
In
is that.
my job, that's not a big deal for a
Mm.
whole host of reasons, including the fact that I can make up the time, at the other end of the day or something because of what the kind of I can do more work that evening. But if you're working in a restaurant or fast food, if you're doing other things where you have to be within set hours to do what you do, you can't just make that up easily. And you if you're getting paid by the hour, you've just lost that money. It's just gone.
Well, that's true. But back to your other question in terms of policy and that type of agency for people that might be interested who are listening to our conversation. I would have to say, do your homework. That'll be step one
That's good.
in
Yeah.
being an anti-racist. I don't have a list to give you. You look it up. You know what you're interested in. And that'll be step one. What are you most passionate about? What matters to you the most? And Google it
Yeah.
and see what your community has for you. The other thing that we use, and you'll see in some of the work that I've been doing. Well, I worked in the health department for the health department for about 8 years, but then I worked for the State Department of Health and Human Services, and then I've worked in community groups, churches, and all around and stuff like that. But one of the things we always try to do is have a real life, in person, straight out of the local news scenario.
Mhm.
This happened. We changed the names to protect the innocent, and then this summer when Black lives didn't seem to matter
Yeah.
compared to some of the destruction to our very fabric of what our nation is built on
Yeah.
that happened recently, and and the and the response
Yeah.
of it locally, within your families, and then have a conversation about that. We use news clips. I use
Mhm.
YouTube a lot because you can use
I do too.
you
Yep.
you can use YouTube with your work, and we talk about this happened. I mean, you can. I've decided that I'm even going to go back to Ferguson. I mean, this is
Yeah.
the. I mean, at least it's in
Yeah.
people's recent history,
Right.
and maybe compare that with these different things, and have a conversation about that. Well, you
Yeah.
can have a conversation with your family about that, but that's what our work does.
Yeah.
We things that in recent memory that you conveniently forgot just because You're wired that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, now we're going to bring it front and center and let's talk about what was happening. What did you see at the time? What did you think at the time? What are you thinking about it now? What are you going to do about it? Because
Yeah.
remember, being an anti-racist, from my perspective,
Yeah.
has the answer to this question built in. What are you going to do with this information you have?
Right.
Other than just sit around and go like, oh, that's too bad. No,
Right.
that's not being an anti-racist.
Yep. What are you going to do about it?
Who are you going to talk to? Who are you going to, I mean, even just having a conversation with your kids is action.
Yeah.
Well,
Or
I
your
don't feel
roommate
comfortable
or
about,
your parents.
are your parents, or how about your best friend
Yeah.
who you know has an
Yeah.
attitude about whatever?
Yeah.
Well, I'm an introvert. That is not an excuse. So write it to somebody. You don't
Yes.
even have to speak the words, but it's some action. I'm not saying be somebody who you aren't. Well, I am saying be somebody who you don't feel
Yeah.
comfortable being.
Oh, that's so good. Yes. So all of this work we're talking about, and we're getting to the end of our time here, all of this work we're talking about is not easy. It's often uncomfortable.
Well, it's more than uncomfortable. It's it's dangerous to
Yeah.
accidentally to think that you might sever a relationship
Yeah.
with a beloved family member
Yeah.
or within your community or whatever. I mean,
That
yes,
doesn't mean we get to avoid it.
not if you want to be an anti. I mean,
Right.
you can be a well-meaning person, but
But that doesn't get us anything. I mean, it doesn't get us anywhere. Nothing will change if that's all we are.
if it's just right. Or it might change very slowly because maybe you, at your deathbed, donated the rest of your money to the United Way, right? Which
Right.
is a good thing to do.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so good. That's I don't want to take away from that at all.
That's fair. Yeah.
But there and I don't mean but, I mean and there's other things you can do within your social group, within your family group.
Yeah.
Think of, I would say, list here, anti-racism 101. List all the names, all the groups or names of people you have influence with.
Oh,
People
that's
who
excellent.
like
Yeah.
you or love you, are concerned about you, or who know you. Even at church, even if you just wave, they count, even if they
Yeah.
don't know you very well. Who might you be able to have a relationship that you can influence? And then think of how you want to use your agency and use it.
Amen. Thank you, Valerie Smith.
All righty. It was a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.